This is part one of a two-part series on a poem called Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. In this episode, we'll be going over the history of the character Ulysses. We'll be talking about his history, particularly from the Illiad and the Odyssey. So I hope you enjoy this two-part series on Ulysses.
Howdy, and welcome to the Preaching Poetry Podcast. The Preaching Poetry Podcast uses poetry to inspire conversation and to rediscover the world. Let's get to it.
Welcome back. It's good to be with you again. Today's poem is Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. It little profits that an idle king, by this still hearth, among these barren crags, matched with an aged wife, I mete and dole unequal laws unto a savage race that hoard and sleep and feed and know not me. I cannot rest from travel. I will drink life to the lees. All times I have enjoyed greatly, have suffered greatly, both with those that loved me and alone, on shores, and when through scudding drifts the rainy Hyades vex the dim sea. I am become a name, for always roaming with a hungry heart, much have I seen and known. Cities of men, and manners, climates, councils, governments, myself not least but honored of them all, and drunk delight of battle with my peers, far on the ringing plains of windy Troy. I am a part of all that I have met, yet all experience is an arch wherethrough gleams that untraveled world whose margin fades forever and ever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rust unburnished, not to shine in use. As though to breathe were life. Life piled on life were all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour is saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer of new things, and violet were, for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself. And this gray spirit, yearning in desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bound of human thought. This is my son, mine own Telemachus, to whom I leave the scepter and the isle, well loved of me, discerning to fulfill this labor by slow prudence to make mild a rugged people, and through soft degrees subdue them to the useful and the good. Most blameless is he, centered in the sphere of common duties, decent not to fail in offices of tenderness, and pay meet adoration to my household gods when I am gone. He works his work, I'm mine. There lies the port, the vessel puffs her sail, there gloom the dark, broad seas. My mariners, souls that have toiled and wrought and thought with me, that ever with a frolic welcome took the thunder and the sunshine and opposed free hearts, free foreheads, you and I are old. Yet old age hath yet his honor and his toil. Death closes all, but something ere the end, some work of noble note may yet be done, not unbecoming men that strove with gods. The lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans round with many voices. Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset, and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that the gulfs will wash us down. It may be we shall touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, one equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Now, before we get too far into this poem, I just want to go ahead and tell you right now, this is going to be a two-part episode. It's a long poem in its own right, and there's also a lot of backstory here that I think you need to understand if you don't already know who Ulysses is. Okay, so we're going to start by talking about the main character of this poem, Ulysses. If you don't know your Homer, then you may need to brush up on a few things before you can get the most out of the story, and that's why I'm doing this now. So, we're going to start with the Trojan War. Okay, the Trojan War started with a quarrel between Hera, okay, the goddess of women, marriage, family, childbirth. Also, she was Zeus's wife and his sister. Gross. Just get over it. Greek gods did all kinds of that weird stuff. So it was Hera, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, warfare. She sprung fully formed out of Zeus's head. She has no mother goddess. And Aphrodite. Okay, Aphrodite is the goddess of beauty, love, and sex. So Zeus has these three goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, go to Paris. Now, I know what you're thinking. Paris was the name of a person, not the city of lights, so they're not going to the city of Paris. It's not like Zeus sent them to the Eiffel Tower. Instead, he sends them to a man named Paris. And Paris decides that Aphrodite is the most beautiful. Like, go figure, she's the goddess of beauty. It was not hard to see that one coming, so it's kind of like, duh? So Hera is not happy about this. She and Athena both kind of have a little bit of a grudge here, but Athena tends to have a little bit more of this wisdom going on. She doesn't cause as many big problems here, but Hera really likes to cause problems when her husband does things that she doesn't like. And then, of course, when this mere mortal, decides against her, she decides to retaliate by causing the most beautiful mortal woman, named Helen, to fall in love with Paris, which I guess that's retaliation. I don't know how having beautiful women fall in love with you is by itself, a punishment, but Paris takes Helen to Troy, the city where he lives, to come and live with him. There's just one problem so far. Helen is married to somebody else, to a king named Menelaus. Okay, and Menelaus very obviously decides that this is not okay. This guy kidnapping his wife and taking her to his city, he's not okay with that, so he prepares for war. Now, we need to back up just a little bit further and talk a little bit about Helen here. Okay, so before Helen got married, because she's been the most beautiful woman on the planet for a while, but before she got married, a bunch of these Greek dudes of the highest order, first-rate princes, lords, leaders, they all wanted to marry her because she was hot. Okay, that's the way it was, and everybody was like, I got to go see if I have a chance. It was almost kind of like The Bachelor, or The Bachelorette, I guess, with Helen. And all of these guys want to marry her. She's hot. She's the, daughter of a king. So not only is she a princess, but she's a hot princess, and everybody wants her. So all of these Greek kings and princes show up, and they keep arguing and fighting about who's going to marry her, and they don't trust each other. But then a man named Odysseus comes up with an agreement. He says that all of these potential husbands will fight to protect the marriage of Helen, whoever she ends up marrying. Oh, and by the way, Helen doesn't really get to pick. Her father does. So her father receives all of these oaths by all of the suitors who want to marry Helen. They all swear that they will fight to defend that marriage and her father's choice. And Helen's dad picked Menelaus. Okay? So Menelaus, after his wife falls in love with Paris and gets taken off to Troy, he calls all of those guys who wanted to marry Helen. They're all princes and kings and, rulers of different city-states and islands and whatnot. He calls all of them together and he says, you guys swore to protect my marriage. And so all of these Greek leaders now have to go to war. They made a solemn promise and they have to keep it. And so this giant army of Greeks, sort of brought together by Menelaus, is led by a king named Agamemnon. Now, Agamemnon is the big dog. He is the warrior, he is the leader, and he gathers together the army, and they sail to Troy, where Helen is, and they lay siege to the city for 10 years. Now, all the greats show up to fight. Okay, everybody does. Okay, Achilles, Odysseus, Hector, Paris, Ajax, Diomedes, Aeneas, Pandarus, like all of the gods of Olympus get in on it here and there. And eventually, the Greeks managed to kill Paris using the weapons of the ancient hero Heracles. But y'all, there is so much more to this story. You are getting the condensed version. So go read the Illiad if you want to know more, or maybe read the spark notes to the Illiad. Anyway, your decision, okay? And if you could, read it in the original Greek. That'd be fun. Or find yourself a good translation. Whatever you got to do. But anyway, the Greeks managed to kill Paris using the weapons of Heracles, and the Greeks kind of achieved their objective, right? Like they kill Paris, they get revenge on him, but they didn't actually beat Troy yet. And so the Greeks, with the help of Odysseus, okay, he has been accumulating for himself a reputation of being cunning and wise and shrewd, okay? The Greeks follow the plan. I don't know if it's exactly his plan, but he's the guy who pushes this plan to build that giant wooden horse. You may have heard of this part anyway, the Trojan horse. So they built a giant wooden horse and they leave it behind on the plains. They pack up their army and head back to their ships and they sail away. Now, through some clever trickery on the part of Odysseus and with the aid of a supposedly marooned Greek soldier, the Trojans are convinced not to destroy the horse, but to bring it inside the city. Now, later that night, the Greeks sneak out of the horse, and contrary to popular opinion, there weren't a few Greeks in the horse, and maybe, there was like an army of Greeks inside the horse, and they all come out and sack the city. No, there were a few Greeks in the horse. They come out of the horse at night and they sneak to the gates and they open the gates to let the rest of the Greek army in. So the Greek army kind of sails away, but they just kind of sail around the corner out of sight. As night falls, they start to sail back. They move closer and closer to the city in the darkness. You didn't think they would really just give up and sail away, did you? And so when the gates are opened, this army comes in. Troy is sacked, looted, and burned, and her people are either killed or they become slaves. Okay, so that is kind of the really, really, really short version of the Iliad. And we've talked a lot about a guy named Odysseus. Okay, well, Odysseus is the Greek name for Ulysses. Okay, so Ulysses and Odysseus, you have Greek and Roman names, but it's the same person. Okay, so the next part that we need to talk about is not just the Iliad and the battle, the Trojan War. We need to talk about the Odyssey. Okay, Odysseus's sort of sequel to the Iliad. What happens after the war itself. So when we talk about Ulysses, this story, the Odyssey, is about him. So if I say Ulysses or I say Odysseus, just know that they're the same person. Okay? So Troy gets sacked and burned. The Greeks take over. They kill everybody. They get Helen back, all that good stuff. And now they need to head home. But remember how I said there was a lot of fighting and the gods of Olympus showed up to fight? Well, those gods had spent a lot of time fighting on different sides of the war, kind of like they really needed a hobby, so they would just kind of get into it on whichever side they thought was, honoring them the most. And so by the end of this war that lasts years, 10 years, there are a lot of grudges held between gods and gods and mortals. And so there's just so many people angry that there's no way that just because the war is over, the Greeks are just going to sail home and everything's going to be fine. No. There is no way for them to get back quickly or easily. A massive storm brews up just after all of the kings and their soldiers and their sailors set out to go back to their homes. This massive storm jumps up, and it causes a lot of problems, blowing people off course, sinking and killing some. And Odysseus, likewise, parts ways with the other kings and tries to return to his beloved wife Penelope and his son Telemachus on his island kingdom home of Ithaca. And he raids a bit on his way home, but that same storm that's blowing the Greeks around, well, he gets caught in storms too, and he gets blown off course to an island. And this little island is an island called the Island of the Lotus Eaters. And so they land on these islands. You got to get some more supplies, make repairs to your ship, get out and stretch your legs, all that good stuff. And so as his men sort of explore the island, they begin to also partake of the lotus, the lotus plant. It's offered to them by the people who live there. And as they begin to eat this lotus plant, they are stripped of their memory and they are stripped of their ambition. And so they can't remember who they are, and they can't remember what they want to do. As you can imagine, this is not good for Odysseus. He wants to get home. And he's got these sailors who now they don't want to leave. They just want to hang out comfortably numb and just chill with this lotus and forget the past and forget the future and just live in this sort of pleasant, blissful days of the present. I just kind of imagine them being high but not ever being able to remember what life was like before the high or after the high. So Odysseus, has to literally force his men back onto the ships. It was not an easy going there, but they managed to dodge that bullet of the Island of the Lotus Eaters, and they continue to sail, and they keep sailing and sailing, trying to find their way around. They come to another island, and this island seems like a nice island. There's a lot of sheep around, sheep, that's food, helpful for the Greeks. They go after some of these sheep, and they eventually find a cave, and they go in to try and see, what's going on here? They're exploring, and they get trapped. And Odysseus and his men are trapped inside the cave by a monster, a cyclops. Cyclops is this sort of elemental monster. They're typically associated with the Poseidon. And so the cyclops traps Odysseus and his men in the cave and starts eating them. And so through some cunning and trickery, remember Odysseus is a very shrewd guy, he manages to blind the cyclops and then trick it into opening the door. And he and his men kind of wear the sheepskins and they escape because the cyclops will feel around to see, are those my sheep that are going out? I got to let them out so they can get grass to eat. Well, he's feeling, and he just feels the sheepskin. He's like, okay, but it's, Odysseus and his men wearing the sheepskin. Anyway, they escape, and they get back in their ship, and they continue to sail. And these gods have been causing problems with these storms blowing up and brewing up. And finally, Odysseus manages to enlist the help of the wind god, Aeolus. Now, Aeolus is a really important god if you are sailing on a ship, because the wind is going to have a lot to do with where you can go and how fast you can get there. People rowing forever and ever and ever could take a long time, and it wears people out a lot faster. So, when Ulysses gets the help of Aeolus, it seems like, yeah, we're home free. So Aeolus puts all of the adverse winds, all of the winds that would blow him off course or blow him another way, into a bag. Right, I know, these gods, they did all kinds of weird stuff. But he puts the winds in a bag and gives it to Odysseus. It's like, okay, you hold on to these adverse winds, leave them in the bag, and you should be able to get home. And so Odysseus and his men are sailing and sailing and sailing. Finally, they come within sight of Ithaca. They can see it, and they start to celebrate, and they're real excited. Unfortunately, Odysseus's crew tend to cause him a lot of headaches, and we're not quite done with our story yet. You see, they see that bag with the winds in it, and they think it's treasure. And they want to know, is he going to share? Is Odysseus going to share that treasure with us? They're not sure. So they open up the bag. And as soon as they do, all of these adverse winds blow them all the way back to Aeolus, who refuses to help them anymore. And so now, having gone from within sight of Ithaca, kind of back to where they started, they have to do the best they can with the wind not on their side. And so they come to another island, and this island is full of cannibals. And this island full of cannibals sink all of Ulysses' ship, or all of Odysseus' ships, except for the one he is on. Okay? Eating his crew, killing people, all that good stuff. And so they're down to one ship left. Okay? He left with like his army and a bunch of soldiers to fight with him. Now Odysseus is down to one ship and just a few crew members on that ship. So they manage to escape the island full of cannibals, and they come to another island. An island that was the home of a witch named Circe. Okay? And Circe turns his crew into pigs, or she tries to. And Odysseus manages to overcome Circe with his wit, and then he seduces her. I guess that's one way to kind of, get you to set your crew free. So she lifts the curse after 1 year, probably because Odysseus, maybe he was just really good in the sack. I don't know. But whatever, she agrees to let them go, okay? And as a year later, Odysseus and his crew set sail to leave Circe's island. Okay? And Odysseus then, on the advice of Circe, sails to Hades. Okay? Kind of a detour, but Circe advised it, and he took the advice, and he sails to Hades, and he meets various Greek heroes. He receives a visit from his own dead mother, and an important prophecy from a seer named Tiresias not to mess with Helios, the sun god's cattle. So leave the sun cows alone. So Odysseus and his men set sail again on their last ship, and he has to dodge sirens, these mythical mermaid-like creatures that try to lure sailors to their death on these rocks, and he has them tie him to the mast and, stuff wax in their ears so they can't hear the songs. But they make it past sirens and monsters and all kinds of things, and they make landfall, finally, on the island of Helios. You'll never guess what happens next. Yeah, if Ulysses' crew is any sort of indication that they tend to sort of get him in more trouble than they tend to help him, yeah, same here. So they get to the island. Odysseus warns the crew, but as soon as he turns his back for about 5 seconds, they start having a barbecue with the sun god's cattle, the very thing that he was warned not to do. And so Helios destroys their ship. Odysseus and his men, when he sees what happens, he wrangles them all on board. They try to set sail to get away from the island. And as they're out at sea, Helios destroys the ship and kills Odysseus' crew. Odysseus is the only survivor, and he washes ashore on Calypso's island. Now, Odysseus has no ship. He's a stowaway, not a stowaway, he's marooned, stranded on this island. Calypso is not inclined to let him leave. And so with no way off the island, he stays there for the next 8 years. 8 years. And he's essentially a hostage. He's held captive by Calypso, a beautiful and temptress, island nymph. And at first, Odysseus is amused by the situation. He's like, hey, it's not bad to be captured by a beautiful nymph who's really lonely and is super into you. Yeah. Odysseus seems to sleep with a lot of witches and nature spirits and whatnot on this journey. Not a classy thing. I don't recommend it. My recommendation is that you should keep it in your pants around witches and island nymphs. That's just probably the best way to do it. Anyway, at first he's amused, he sleeps with Calypso, but he begins to grow really regretful of his captivity. And, at first he's just trying to make the best of the situation, I guess. But as time goes on, he begins to miss his home and his family with this sort of overwhelming loneliness. Now, eventually, Calypso is basically forced to let Ulysses go by Zeus with the help of Athena. Okay? So, after some divine intervention, Odysseus manages to set sail again for home, but he is shipwrecked this time by Poseidon. Okay? Poseidon is mad at Odysseus because of blinding that Cyclops a few years ago. Cyclopses are the sons of Poseidon, I believe. And anyway, Poseidon was upset about it, sinks the ship, and Odysseus washes up on the shore of yet another island. Again, this is getting kind of, it's getting kind of stale. But anyway, he washes up on another island on the shore of Phaeacia, I believe. Phaeacia. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it. My pronouncing English words transliterated from Greek are not always my strong suit. But anyway, this island is full of honorable and hospitable people who happen to have a convenient tradition of helping shipwrecked sailors return home. So they set sail, and they take Ulysses back home to Ithaca. Finally, he left, he fought in a 10-year war, and then basically spent another 10 years either sailing around the Mediterranean or captive in Calypso's island. And, 20 years later, he finally makes it home. Finally! Okay, it's kind of ridiculous that it takes that long. Anyway, back home, his infant son, Telemachus, is now a grown man, and he and his mother Penelope have been trying to hold off a horde of suitors who want to marry Penelope and take the throne. Okay, so Telemachus and Penelope devise some really clever schemes of their own, like father, like son, chip off the old block, whatever. And they come up with all of these needlessly elaborate plans involving axes and archery. And, that's all cool and all, but then really what they do is Odysseus and, he reveals himself to his family. They come up with this plan. They get a few loyal friends, and then they ambush the suitors. And while it's only 5 to 108, they kill almost all of the 108 suitors there. Okay? And after all of this happens, after the war, after the Odyssey, after the scouring of Ithaca from all of these suitors who want to steal the throne, finally, 20 years later, Odysseus or Ulysses returns home to Ithaca, back to where he wanted to be the entire time. And so now we can finally start talking about the poem itself. You see, this is why you should have paid attention in school. You could have saved us a lot of time here if you already knew these things. Some of you probably already did. Anyway, Ulysses, remember, is the Romanized name of Odysseus. Okay, and so the poem is called Ulysses based on the Roman name. Now, I'm not going to talk about the author of the poem right now. We're not going to talk about Tennyson because we don't have time. Okay, if you want to know about Tennyson, look him up or tune in to a future episode where we talk about one of Tennyson's poems. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk about him a little bit. He was an interesting guy. But now that you have all of this really long backstory of Odysseus, we can get into the poem.
Thank you for listening to the Preaching Poetry Podcast. I hope that you enjoyed your time with us, and we look forward to having you back for more. If you like what you heard, please be sure to leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe. If you're looking for more content, you can find us on Apple, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, basically anywhere you find podcasts. If you want to join our community or just want to get in touch with us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Preaching Poetry.